but thanks for coming. All right, we might get started with the intro stuff, and then if a few more people come in, they shouldn't miss too much. So we'll just start off the evening. Welcome to our How to Survive MD1 event. We'll start off with an acknowledgement of country. So I'd like to pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging of the Yorta Yorta lands. That's where I'm zooming in from tonight. I acknowledge their ongoing connection to the lands, the waterways and the skies of this area, and their connection to the community on this land too. And I'd like to acknowledge the lands where you're all zooming in from tonight as well, and any Indigenous students that might be with us tonight. So this is a Halad to Health event. Some of you might not have had too much to do with Halad before. So we're a charity, a not-for-profit that works to raise funds to help rural communities in the Philippines. So we started out with biomed revision lectures back in the day, and now we've started to do a few things for medical students. We've also done GAMSAT tutoring and med interview sessions. So you might have heard about us from those things. But thank you for coming to our events, because the support you give us allows us to raise these funds to support these communities, and the work that we're doing is quite exciting. So thank you for supporting us. So who are we? My name's Hannah. I'm a third year medical student. I'm up in Cobram this year in the extended rural cohort. And I've also done a bit of stuff with the Halad GAMSAT team and the MD1 tutoring last year and this year. And we also have Charlotte with us tonight. So Charlotte is a Halad alumni, and this year she's also going to be helping out with the MD1 tutoring. And Charlotte's down in Melbourne at the Austin this year as a second year. So she'll have lots of tips given that she's just come through MD1. So here's tonight's plan. So we're going to go over sort of the structure of MD1. You are all sort of a bit of a caveat. You're on the new MD program. So we haven't experienced everything that your program will involve, but we have had a pretty similar experience. So hopefully the knowledge that we've gained will be able to pass on to you guys, and it'll be helpful. So yeah, starting with the structure, then dealing with the content overload, talking about different styles of learning in the MD. We'll give you a few study hacks and a few helpful resources that we found useful when we were going through MD1. And just to let you know as well, if you've got any questions about anything that's coming up as we go, feel free to pop them in the chat, or you can even unmute yourself and ask us if you'd like. We want this to sort of be interactive and be as helpful as possible for you guys. So yeah, if you do have any questions or something doesn't make sense, feel free to ask us. So structure of MD1. So it probably feels pretty overwhelming at the moment. You've had probably lots of intro lectures and lots of people coming and telling you lots of different things, but basically the content's all sort of broken up into blocks, and it's probably pretty different to what you're used to. If you've come from undergrad, you'll have, a few subjects every semester and everything's sort of put into its subject chunk, but everything that you do within med is all sort of the one subject, and it's all very interconnected and related. But it's still broken down into these blocks in first year. So you're starting your foundations block, and then you go into cardiovascular, respiratory, like all the way through to the end of the year. And it's pretty, it's at the start of the year, it can be a bit sort of confusing, and some people that you're working with might have done a lot of immuno in their undergrad, so they're really all over the foundation stuff, and you might feel like you're a bit confused and you don't really know what's happening, and that's okay. Sometimes the blocks will be really confusing, you won't enjoy them as much as other ones, but then you might come up to the cardio block or the rest block later down the track, and you'll find that you can take in that knowledge a bit easier than the previous blocks, because you might have done something similar to that in your undergrad, or you've had a different experience. So it's kind of nice if you're not loving the current block that you're on, you know that the knowledge from that block is in one area and you can go on to a different one afterwards, and you don't have to know everything the first time you go through a block. I feel like at the start of the year, it's sort of harder to see the overall picture, because you're starting with foundations and then you go into cardiovascular and you sort of only know those two systems. But as you keep progressing through the year, knowledge sort of links between the different blocks and everything sort of starts to make a lot more sense. So if you sort of feel like you don't really know how everything's fitting in at the start, that's completely normal. And as you progress, it'll just get a bit easier. Like, for example, I found some things in the cardiovascular block were linked to the renal block, but we obviously hadn't learned anything about the renal system yet. So I always found that stuff really confusing and could never really understand it at the time. But then later on, as I started to learn more about the kidneys later on, it sort of made that stuff from the original block of cardiovascular make more sense. And it's really cool to sort of see how your knowledge expands throughout the year and how the different systems are all quite related. So yeah, don't get too stressed out if you're struggling at the start and you don't know how it's all fitting into the big picture, because that sort of comes over time as the year progresses. So that's sort of an overview of the year. So how the learning's actually delivered. There's so many different classes and tutes and lectures that you guys will get, and it might be a bit confusing at the start just to sort of fit everything in, but we'll sort of go through the different types of learning. So you'll have your tutes. So you'll have your case supported learning. I believe this year you're doing online for the first part of the case. So we on Mondays would normally meet in person to go through the questions and what the case was. But I think you might be doing that online this year, which is good because it means that you might have a bit more flexibility with when you're doing that. And then you'll come together as a group on a Friday and you'll discuss the case and work through, and you'll build like a mechanism. You might have heard of that if you've done a bit of intros for that now. And so they're really good to get a solid sort of understanding of what you actually need to know from the block and what knowledge is actually important, because the diseases that you sort of work through in your CSLs are sort of the ones that they want you to know the most knowledge about and the ones that are quite important. You'll also have PP tutorials. So they'll be with some sort of doctor working in the field. And sometimes it sort of felt like PPs were sort of very separate to the rest of the course. And because it's not sort of like more content heavy, everything else is sort of about like, you know, content and learning things that you have to memorize or fit into a picture. PP is sort of separate to that, and you'll work through ethical things that come up, working in a team and learning about like how doctors actually live and work. And it's really cool being able to ask your tutor questions about what their actual job looks like, because I feel like in MD1, you don't always get the picture of what's happening. So they're really useful, and yeah, you can definitely gain a lot out of them if you put in a bit of time. So yeah, would recommend that. You also have your clinical skills tutorial. So they'll be with another doctor, where you'll learn how to take your histories, how to do different exams. Hopefully you guys will be in person doing those this year. When I was in MD1, a lot of it ended up being online, which is a bit depressing. But yeah, they're really great. Just get your hands onto things. Don't be like worried about not knowing how to do things at the start, because the more you practice and the more you get used to taking histories and doing different examinations, the better you're going to get. And then you'll also have lectures. I feel like a point to make here, when you're in undergrad, I feel like lectures are sort of the basis of the content that you need to know for a particular topic. And if you know all the lecture content well, then you're probably going to go pretty well in the exams. It's not necessarily the same in medicine. The lectures are important and they sort of give you a guide as to how much knowledge you need to know about a particular topic. But if you're just focusing on the lectures and you ignore like your CSLs and the practicals as well, you're not going to get like the whole picture of what's actually involved within medicine, and you're not going to be able to tie it all together. So it's really important that you don't get too caught up on just memorizing every single lecture slide, but rather thinking about sort of the overall picture and how everything relates, and use them as a guide for your study rather than the only thing that you use for your study. You also have online modules, so I guess working through the CSLs, but then also other modules that come up throughout the year, and self-directed learning. So I guess it's important to be aware of which ones you need to be doing for each block and keeping track of them so you don't forget about them, because they are quite helpful. And then you'll also have your pracs, so your hands-on things, so your microbiology and immunology pracs, pathology pracs, and anatomy pracs as well. And I think a point to make about the pracs is they are really useful for like getting hands-on and actually seeing how things work. I know the pathology ones are really good because you can actually see like sections of diseases that had actually occurred and see what it looks like physically inside different body structures. And they're great sort of to bring your knowledge together. I think a point to make though as well is because you're all going to be coming from different backgrounds from your undergrad. Some people might have done postgrads and have done research in particular areas. And some people are going to come to the pracs and are like already over all of the knowledge, and they'll be able to answer all of the questions that the demonstrator's asking And you might be standing there like, what is going on? I don't understand this. I know I was in first year, especially in pathology. I just had no idea what was happening. And I just felt like everyone around me just knew so much more. I wish I was less afraid to sort of ask questions and ask those people to explain things to me, because I feel like it's so great that you have all these people around you that might be more knowledgeable than you and can explain things in a different way to help you understand it. So don't be afraid when you're in these classes to speak up and answer questions, even if you're not sure of the answer, because if you get something wrong, you're probably going to learn more from that than if you just know all of the answers. So definitely get involved as much as you can within your practice, because they're really good learning opportunities. And then placements. So I've heard that you guys are going to have 2 GP placements a month and 1 hospital placement as well. So that's going to be fantastic. When we were in first year, we did 1 GP placement and 1 hospital day, and then everything got pulled. And it made the start of second year a bit trickier because we didn't really understand how the hospital system worked and where we sort of fitted into the picture of that. So I think it'll be really useful just to sort of get used to being in the clinical environment, seeing how the teams work together, how allied health staff work with doctors, and just sort of observing how everything happens. So yeah, I think within the GP practice as well, again, it's really useful to know how the practice sort of runs. You won't have GP placements again until your 3rd year. So it's really good to have a bit more exposure to the GP practice when you're in first year. And I guess the learning when you're in placements in first year might be a little bit more observational, particularly at the start of the year when you haven't learned all of your different examinations yet and how to take particular histories. But just try and take as many opportunities as you can to like see patients and speak to them. Even if you don't know what questions you need to ask to get like a perfect OSCE answer out of someone that's come in with a particular condition, patients are like the best people to learn from. And it's so much easier to ask a patient about a condition that they're living with and what they sort of experience than just reading it from a book and trying to memorize it. It's a lot easier to picture someone with a condition. And they can be a really good source of information as well. Like if you don't understand a particular disease and they're living with it, like they're going to have so many more answers and you'll be able to just ask them about them. So just be really curious on your placements and try and take as many opportunities as you can, even if it is more observational. I think you can still gain a lot from that. And then I think discovery subjects is a new thing for you guys this year. So we won't have too much knowledge about that for you, unfortunately. But I guess something that we can say is just try and keep on top. I think so it's sort of like an elective subject that you'll get to pick. So I assume you'll have a few assessments and extra things for that to do. So just try and stay on top of it and don't forget about it. Because try and be organized and add it to your to-do list of things to do each week and just chip away at it as you go. So it doesn't get too overwhelming. Are there any questions so far? I'll just check the chat. No. But if you do have any questions, feel free to shout out. So we'll move on to dealing with content overload. So we've got a few different tips here. First year med is so much information coming in at once. So you're going to have a variety in your learning, which is really great. There's going to be lectures, tutes. We really encourage you to look up different online videos, YouTube, practice questions, drawing up your mechanisms from the CSLs is really great. And just trial a lot of different strategies if you can. The years pass fail. It's different to when you're in undergrad and you're working really hard to get into medicine and, you want to know all of the content and be over everything. I feel like it's harder to do that when you're in medicine because there's just an infinite amount of knowledge that you can know about any particular topic. So the exciting thing about the fact that it's pass fail is that you can trial different things. And if it's not really working, then you have an opportunity to change what you're doing and review how you're going. So definitely, try different strategies to things that you did in undergrad because it is a different sort of way of learning. Sharing the workload is really helpful. So if you can get together with a study group, it could be your group from CSL or some friends that you've met. Sharing notes between yourselves and resources between each other is like a really great way just to like have a shared experience and work through all the workload together. Testing yourselves really good. Practice questions are honestly the best way to remember things. I feel like they've probably given you, I remember in first year, they were telling you, it's like, don't write notes, just do questions. It's so much better. And I think it feels less satisfying if you're only doing questions, but you take in a lot more and you memorize things a lot more, especially if you're getting things wrong and then you can work out why that's happening. And Another tip, just try and be as organized as you can. Write out a calendar with all of your assessments, work out which weeks are going to be busier than others. Within the blocks, make sure you're checking off all the content that you're required to do in the weeks. Try and stay up to date with the lectures, because there are a lot of lectures, and falling behind just absolutely sucks. So yeah, I always had checklists and massive weekly planners of what I wanted to do in each day. And I didn't always get through the lists, but it was kind of nice to see that everything was there and I knew what I needed to do by the time we got to the end of a block. So yeah, another big tip, I feel like I've already mentioned it today, but really try and focus on understanding content, not memorizing it. It's really important, especially when you get into the later years of the MD into second year, when you need to understand whole conditions. I feel like first year can be tricky because you're learning all of these like specific processes and pathological processes of different diseases. But try and see the bigger picture, because that tiny detail isn't necessarily that important when you get into your clinical practice. So if you don't understand every single part of something, that's all right. But yeah, just sort of fitting it all together. So taking it slow, learning to understand, and you're learning this information to make you a competent doctor in the future when you're with your patient. So just remembering that as well, I think, is important. So using lots of reflection after your assessments, you can think back, how did I study for that assessment? What was I doing that was helpful? What wasn't helpful? And that should be really helpful for you guys. Prioritizing your learning, so sticking to things that are actually useful. I feel like it can be really easy to just go down little rabbit holes of one thing that a lecturer mentioned that you don't understand, so you like look it up. And like I said before, like medical knowledge, it just is infinite. You can never know every single thing about a topic, so try not to go down little rabbit holes and get like caught up on something. Obviously you can if you're really interested in a topic, and you might find that there's some blocks that you're just like super interested, so you want to learn those extra things, and that's great, like that's awesome, but you don't have to do that all the time, and don't pressure yourself to do that all the time. So try and have fun with it if you can. And another big tip, I think,
Hannah, there's just a question in the chat.
Oh, okay. Sorry, Hannah, when you mentioned writing down questions, do you mean questions to ask yourself as revision, or questions about the content that you currently don't understand? I feel like when you mentioned writing down questions, I can't remember when I mentioned that. Sorry, guys. But I think probably both. So writing questions instead of lecture notes. Yeah, okay. So when I was in first year, I actually just like annotated next to my lecture notes. And then I would also try and write questions from the learning outcomes of the lecture. And that's a really useful thing for revision, because you can go back, you know what their learning outcomes actually are from the lecture. That's what they want you to know. And it's sort of focused more, I guess, on the broader pictures from the lectures. And then you could answer those questions later on as revision, which it was quite helpful. Or questions about the content that you don't currently understand. But I guess you could also do that. If there's content that comes up and you know you don't understand it, writing questions on it or looking up for some resources online that have those questions is also helpful for your revision. So yeah, what was your strategy with lectures, Charlotte?
So I, like the typical med student, got an iPad last year, and I also annotated the lectures as I went along. And similar to you, I think, particularly at the start, I was treating them as the holy grail, like you did in biomed, but I realized that that's not as important. But yeah, learning objectives are really helpful. And if a lecture doesn't have them, which a lot of them probably don't, you can try and write your own, or try and pull out the main or important points from a lecture. And I think I talk about this a little bit in the slides coming up. But like figuring out the importance of the content in the lecture and how that relates, I guess, to everything else you've studied as well. But yeah, I can talk about that in a minute.
Yeah, awesome. So yeah, final tips for dealing with content overload. I think this is a really important one. Make sure you have a life outside of medicine. Obviously, you've all been working really hard to get into the course, and congratulations, you're in the course, you're here. Medicine is now going to be a part of your life forever. And it really is lifelong learning, like they talk about it, but it is. And it's really important that you can find a balance now with how much you need to study, how much time you need to spend on the content to make sure you're comfortable with it. But you need to then allocate time just to give yourself time to relax, hang out with your friends, enjoy your hobbies, like whatever it is you like doing, exercising, because whilst medicine is an important part of your life, it doesn't have to be the only thing that's in your life. And if it becomes that, then I think it would make it harder, because you probably would stress yourself out more because you're finding out more information that you don't know. I feel like the further you get into med, the more you realize how much you absolutely have no idea what's going on. So being able to have those things outside of medicine that help you stay, like, give you a bit of hope outside when things are a bit annoying or a bit frustrating inside medicine is really important. So that's definitely a really big thing. I might handball over to Charlotte now to talk about different styles of learning.
All right. So just as Hannah's already touched on a little bit tonight already, I think the transition from undergrad to med is difficult. And I know it's easy for me to say now because I've done the year, like, yeah, adjust your learning, like try new things because I've been through it. But I know in the moment I was thinking like, no, I'm fine. Like what I've done has worked. But it's probably not going to keep working, sadly. And that's okay. Like this year is pass fail. And it's a good time to try new things because medicine is really a different type of learning. Like it's not textbook knowledge. And even me starting ND2 this week and seeing a couple of patients on the few placements we had last year, you can see as well that when you see a patient in front of you, it's a completely different story again than the notes that you have. So in terms of, I guess our best tips is to really get involved in as many types of teaching as possible and find out what works best for you. So come to the revision sessions that we'll be running. I found it really helpful myself, coming and hearing revision lectures from MD2s, Hannah. They give great questions and answer your questions. And it's just great to hear the content from the perspective of someone else who has done it. Because your lecturers, just, they teach the content to be taught, if that makes sense, but they're not at the level where they're trying to learn it. So it's really, really helpful to have second years, third years, fourth years to tutor you as well. Peer tutoring is something you may have heard of as well. Not sure if you've heard of it yet, but it's something you can sign up for where you're paired up with two, usually second years, but I think it can be any year, students who will run a weekly tute with you. And I found that absolutely amazing as well. Similarly to the revision sessions, but it was on a weekly basis, just to be able to ask questions, like pick the brain of MD2s, and hear the content from a different perspective. And that's a kind of a common theme throughout all of these points, is that the more ways that you kind of try and learn a piece of information or content through videos or mechanisms or different books, textbooks even, the easier it will be for you and the more you'll understand it. And this second point here, focus on CSL. I wish I guess listened to this point. Like CSL, particularly for your short answer and very short answer question exams, is everything. So each week there's a different case, as I'm sure you may know, about a particular condition. And at the end of the week, you'll have written a mechanism that combines all the risk factors and everything that happened in that patient for these particular presentations to occur. And that is really a big focus of MD1 is the pathophys, those mechanisms, those flow charts. So that kind of big picture idea, being able to look at a presentation or a disease and figure out how it happens and why the symptoms manifest that way is a big focus. And the learning objectives for CSL are really great for that as well. So on the note of making questions, I think I actually used the learning objectives that are given at the end of every CSL at the end of the week. I use those as exam questions at the end of the year. So for example, it would say something like, describe the pathophysiology of type 2 diabetes or something. And if that's a learning objective, then you should be able to sit there and type out an answer or draw a mechanism about that point, if that makes sense. So I found those learning objectives really, really helpful. So I guess this is what we were told as well. Lectures, do the lectures. I'm not saying don't do the lectures. Do the lectures as a base point, but then expand from there. Don't make that your end point. And I guess you could see them as almost supplementary material or a guide to your learning, like Hannah was saying as well. So yeah, kind of what I was saying before, try and embrace trying new things. I know it's hard because we've all been set in our ways. For example, when I started, I heard about this thing called Anki that I'm sure many of you know about. And I looked at it and I was like, why is this program so old? Like, it's not me. I tried it and it didn't work. And then I came back, I don't know, 3/4 of the way through the year. And I personally just used it for pharmacology because it's essentially, sadly, that's the rote learning part of med. And I found it really, really helpful because it's that spaced repetition and it does it for you. So don't, I guess, shut something out if you don't like it the first time, and just be open to trying new things. And I think it's something you definitely talk about in TP. You do a couple of e-portfolio tasks about learning and things. So try and embrace it. I know it's uncomfortable, but that's a really important tip. Reflection as well. I'll have a slide coming up which kind of shows you what your cats are like throughout the year. And essentially in the September cat or cat 3, you'll be tested on things in the foundation block as well. So it is cumulative. So trying to go back and looking at previous notes or lectures or tasks or anything you found tricky is really important, because med exams are pretty much impossible to cram. It's really difficult to do so. And yeah, so we have a list of resources at the end that we can definitely give you. Try out what works, as we've said many times. And yeah, we've got some great recommendations. And yeah, so the placement that you guys will have, I'm very, very lucky. We only got 2 single days last year, similar to Hannah, I think. And even then, mine was towards the end of the year. And it's a really great learning and a different learning environment. Once again, lots of new things this year, where you've done all this content, you've watched your lectures, you've seen all the notes, and then you have a patient sitting in front of you who, says to the doctor that you're with that they've experienced this, this, and this. And I remember sitting there, kind of it all going in my brain, and then I was like, oh, that makes sense, or like this could be this, and then it just makes sense. So be open to those new experiences. And as Hannah said, you might feel like you can't really contribute much at first, but it's still, I mean, observing can give you as much learning as well. So just embrace it as much as possible. Okay, so here's the assessment slide. So as I mentioned before, you'll have the 4 cats. They're multiple choice exams. I'm pretty sure, yeah, I've got on the next slide, it shows you when each of them will be. So as I was saying, they are cumulative, as the name says. So I think cat 1 tests the first 2 blocks, cat 2 tests half of it's the first 2, half of it's the second 2, and so on and so forth. And it even continues. So I have a cat 5 in the first part of this semester, which is really scary to me. As I mentioned already, the short answer and very short answer questions, end of first and end of second semester. So they're your part in the exam period of both semesters. And cat 4 is also technically an exam in the exam period as well, and cat 2. And as I said before, tips for those is, I guess, the more big picture stuff. Unfortunately, the cats do, obviously, because they're multi-choice, some people find that more difficult, some people don't. They do require you to know things like perfectly almost, particularly pharmacology. As I said, it's clearly not my favorite subject. Whereas a short answer, it's more about kind of that big picture mechanism, and the short answer exam also combines a lot of your truth. So they'll have a question that has something to do with CST or your clinical skills in it as well. So it's not straight content from the one subject. They'll also test your knowledge from pathology practicals, which are quite high yield in terms of pathology in MD1. Anatomy as well, like anatomy questions might be photos of cadavers, not textbook photos, so those kind of things. So in terms of attending your pracs and trying to get the most out of them, I really do recommend it, because they're great revision sources as well and learning. Obviously you have your OSCEs. I don't know if you guys have it in the middle of the year or just the end of the year. We just had it at the end of the year. And that is, as you may know, where you do a clinical exam and history. Ours were online, so probably haven't had the full OSCE experience. But essentially with those, just the more practice you do, the more comfortable you'll be when it comes to the exam. And then the e-portfolio, you've probably heard a lot about all of your assessment already, but e-portfolio, I just had no clue what it was until we actually started doing it. So it's not actually a single portfolio, it's just lots of little tasks that you have to submit. You'll get reminders on Canvas about it throughout the year, often related to the non-scientific aspects of medicine, the stuff you do in PP, and other public health and those things as well. So similar to the tips we've given already, if you just stay on top of things, submit those. Once again, it's pass fail, but yeah, just try and keep on top of it all because it probably seems very overwhelming right now. And then finally, mini CXs, you may have heard of these as well. So these are not as stressful as they seem. It's essentially in your clinical skills tutorials throughout the year. I can't remember exactly how many you have to do. You just need your tutor to listen to you take a history or watch you do an exam, a cardiovascular exam, for example. They give you feedback, you write it all out on a form and you upload it to Canvas. So it's an opportunity for like informal feedback where they will just come, you can just wave them over. Hey, can you just listen to me take a history and give me some feedback and you'll be done. So similar thing, if you just keep on top of those, you'll be right. And if you guys have any questions about assessments, just pop them in the chat as always. So this is what I was talking about before, just a kind of visual description of when our cats were, and yours I assume will be. So cat 1 after these first 3 blocks, cat 2 here, and then this is middle of the year, cat 3 after those blocks, and then cat 4 at the end of the year. And as I said, every time it all keeps getting added. So I think our cat 4 was 120 questions, I believe, at the end of the year, and it's split mostly evenly across all of them. And another thing as well, I didn't mention, the feedback reports that you get for your cat are amazing. They're really, really detailed. They tell you like what questions you got wrong, not the actual question, but the theme of it. They tell you what blocks you did better on and what specific like disciplines, whether you're better at anatomy, pathology, physiology, whatever it is. So they're really helpful in terms of figuring out, particularly after cat 1, because it can be a difficult one because it's your first med exam. It's really useful to see what your strong suit is and what you need to work better on. Surprise, surprise, mine was pharmacology. But yeah, it's really helpful because then you know, okay, I'm comfortable with these things, and particularly if these things were your majors, like if physiology was your major, then you might be, I know all the physiology already, and same with anatomy. So it's good to know, I guess, where you're at in terms of each of the disciplines. So kind of what we talked about already, just some tips for study. So practice questions, of course, as I said, the CSL learning objectives, they aren't released until the Friday afternoon of the case, but they're more good for a revision tool anyway. So I generally didn't use those until I was getting closer to exam time. Integration of your theory as well, as much as possible. That really comes back to CSL because they're real cases where you'll talk about, yeah, the pathophys, but also why the symptoms manifest, and then possible treatments and outcomes and kind of the whole course of the disease. So integrating that is really helpful. As we've said already, spaced repetition, revisiting, the content will seem like it's just going to keep growing. And particularly if you keep track of the number of lectures you have, it's going to sound ridiculous by the end of the year. But it will all come together, I promise. And yeah, I guess an important point that Hannah was mentioning as well at the start, the content's delivered in blocks, but they're not completely separate. And patients, in real life as well have things happening in these multiple blocks, and even questions in end of year exams, because everything relates as one. It's a good way to teach it, but in reality, that's not the way. So mechanisms, and I think I have an example of one coming up, is a really great way to integrate things. And particularly as the great example, cardio and renal blocks tend to, there's a lot that interlock there. So, and even rest as well. And then that can integrate with your knowledge from CST and pathology practice. So try and look at all in the big picture as much as possible. So this is an example of a mechanism that I think my CSL group did in second semester. And you don't need to read the details of it, but it's just an example of one way of learning and one way of studying. I used mechanisms and wrote up my own mechanisms to study, particularly in the second half of the year exam. Because it's not something that you can memorize off a flashcard. It really does require understanding to be able to do. And so it really you can show yourself and prove that you do understand a topic, because you're not just regurgitating information, but you're thinking about why someone, presents with a certain thing, like tachycardia in this example, and following the steps backwards to show that why that happened. So yeah, that's an example of a mechanism. And something I also made, which I think is on the next slide, as revision to the end of the year. I know it seems really fancy, but I like making pretty things. So every CSL case, I've talked about CSL a lot, but it's really, really important. Every week in CSL, there's a case, and it's about a condition. So this one is acute coronary syndrome, it's asthma, type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, etc. And so these kind of summary sheets for me tried to pull everything together. And I also made these because I know I'd use them this year as well. And I think it's just a great revision tool, and even making them was a great revision tool for me. It might not work for you, but I guess this shows what we were saying, is that it's important to know, I guess, what the condition is, the pathophys, so the steps to why something's happening that way. The pathology, of course, comes into it. So knowing what tissue looks like certain days after an injury, which is something that's important to know as well. Macroscopically, microscopically, the immune response, and then a little bit on treatment, but it's not too important in MD1. So I found these really, really helpful for my revision, as I said, for future years as well, because, yeah, although everything is taught separately, and I don't know if it's encouraged as much, but if you can kind of step back and look at the bigger picture, it will all come together. And it's exciting when it all comes together. So yeah, that's a tip of mine, making something like that if it works for you. So now we just have some helpful resources here that you may want to take a screenshot of. You may have heard of these already, and some of them not, but we can just go through them together. So Amboss is something that I use all the time. You can pay for it, but I never did. So you can just Google Amboss and the condition you're after, for example, and you'll be able to access it. It's a US-based or UK-based website. And it's essentially just got everything you need to know about a condition. So like the epidemiology, diagnosis, treatment. So it can be helpful for CSL research that you do, just to kind of get a big picture understanding of what you're looking into, instead of the small details, which you should do as well. But it's good for that big picture. And I've heard that I will continue to use it throughout MD2, MD3 as well. So that's a really good resource. Osmosis, I also use as well, personally. They have lots of good videos on YouTube. Similar thing, it just explains, they also have pathology and pathophys, I believe. Explains things in a different way. They have, I think, once again, you can pay for a subscription, but also YouTube videos that are like the drawing ones, I think, that really help explain things well. As I already mentioned, Anki. Some people I know use it for everything. Like they put all of the lectures, all of the content on there. But if you know how Anki works, I'd assume that would mean you have thousands of cards by the end of the year.
No, thank you.
Yeah, which I don't know if it's very feasible or not. But as I said, great for pharmacology, because that's something you just have to know it. You just have to memorize it. Yeah, did you use Notion, Hannah?
To be honest, I never quite got into Notion, but I know some of my friends rave about it and love it. So they use it as like a note-taking software. You can also set reminders on it and set up like weekly planners for what you want to get done. So that's another thing that you might download and try to use it for note-taking and see how that goes. And with a lot of these things as well, like I feel like especially people who really get into Anki, you see them doing their cards all the time, and sometimes you can get like a bit anxious about how much work they appear to be doing and like what they're using. And like, yeah, try not to get too wound up about like what everyone else is doing, and really try and work out what things are actually useful for your learning and what you can see yourself doing. Like I started doing that with a bit of Anki in first year and had so many cards, and I just hated, like I dreaded doing all of my Anki cards. And I feel like there's a lot of YouTube people, like med students on YouTube from America, that like rave about Anki. And if it works for you, great. But if it doesn't, like don't stress. And that's the same with all of these resources, I guess. Like some things are really going to work for you. So you just need to be open to trying lots of different things. Calgary Guide is a good one for mechanism. So you can just like look up like asthma mechanism Calgary Guide, and it will come up with pretty much a completed mechanism. So a bit of a cheats guide for CSL. So they can be really good if you're not quite understanding how something's working and how it all fits in, just to look at one that's already completed and see how they organized it. So they're really helpful. Something that I didn't know for ages is that on MD Connect, there's an MD Connect library, and that has all of the like heaps of different textbooks and like all of this stuff that's free to use, and it's all online. So it's really easy to access. And I know that was quite helpful for me. I've used a few different textbooks. Like if you're looking, I don't know, there's like Robbins and Cochrane for pathology, and that's really useful. So yeah, being able to access all of those things through MD Connect is really good. The Humorous Hacks podcast, did you use that much in first year, Charlotte?
I did. I think I listened to an episode. I think there's a trend happening. I listened to it at the start of the year, and then I got scared because I didn't understand it. And then I came back to it, and I did find it really helpful. One of the ways that I tend to learn things is by making like little stories up in my head or mnemonics or something like that, because that's just how my brain works. And they do a similar thing where they, for those who don't know it, it's essentially a podcast by two med students, now doctors, I think. I don't think they've posted too many new episodes, but they just post an episode about like old ones about all cardio drugs that are important to know, or like liver failure, or asthma, everything you need to know about asthma. And it's just a nice, once again, you can pop it in your headphones when you're going on a walk or something, getting your exercise in. Just another way, once again, to hear content in a different way that might work for you.
And it might be in first year, some of the content might be a bit overwhelming because they might be talking about things that are probably more relevant in second and third year. But if they're talking about something you've never heard before, and I guess the same as when you're looking at these other resources, you're seeing things that doesn't really make sense, you're probably going to come across it when you're in the later years of med. And it's kind of good just to like, you can sort of absorb information without actually realizing that you're taking it in. Like I know I listened to a fair few Humorous Hacks podcasts in first year and didn't really understand them. But then in second year, when I saw certain conditions in the hospital, it like came back to me. And I think that's the same like the whole way through when you're in your different pracs and different learning activities in first year. I think you absorb more information than you think you know. And when you get to your assessments, things just come back to you. And so, yeah, just remember that. Don't get too stressed that you don't know all of this information and there's so many things that you don't know, because you are actually absorbing more information than you think.
Yeah.
YouTube, you go.
Sorry, we just have a question in the chat from Ace. Should you always supplement the lectures with textbook information, or only if you're completely lost?
I mean,
you can go if you want.
I feel like if you were supplementing all the lectures with textbooks, you probably wouldn't have time to do that. Yeah. So I guess it would be more for things that you just don't understand. If the lecturer is talking about something in a particular way, you just don't get it. It can be helpful to then look it up in the textbook that they've linked with the lecture and like read it. And sometimes that information would come in a bit easier. So I wouldn't recommend it for every single lecture, but definitely for ones that you're a bit lost with. Yeah.
And I think as well, importantly though, textbooks are easy to get lost into.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be supplemented with a textbook. It can be other resources.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's not possible to do it for everything. But the textbooks can be a good resource. Of course, it depends on the one as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Coming up to YouTube is another good option if there's something that you don't understand, just YouTubing like the condition. Armando Hasoudian, I don't know how to say his name, but he says it really quick at the start of his videos. His videos are literally amazing. I watched so many of them in first year. Great for like pathophys, and even like last year in MD2, I still was watching his videos. But there are also so many other YouTube like pages, other med students that explain things. I can't really think of other like ones that I watch. Armando, I watched heaps of in first year though. So he's really good.
Just the osmosis ones, I would say, because they're on YouTube.
Yeah.
And then there's channels, like I remember there's a neuro one. I think it's called Neuroscientifically Challenged or something. And it had great videos, like small little 5-minute ones explaining specific concepts. So I would just YouTube like renal physiology and see what came up. And sometimes, for example, Armando's videos were great. Sometimes they were too much for me, and I try and find another one. And even then, YouTube might not work for you either. So, but it's just, yeah, another way that you can learn something.
Yeah. Yeah. So Anatomedia, is that the green one with the black background?
Yeah. So I use this not too much, but I think it's a good resource just if you struggle with anatomy. It's essentially accessible, I think, off Canvas, or if you just Google Anatomedia UniMelb. It's really great for cadaver photos of, for example, a heart. So the heart that you see in your lectures is beautiful. It's got blue for veins, red for arteries, and it's really nice. Hearts in real life obviously aren't like that. And generally in cats, if they're assessing anatomy, and they sometimes do it in very short answer questions, it will not be a diagram. It'll be a cadaver photo. So it's great if just to kind of see what things look like in real life, particularly as I didn't get to have anatomy practice online in person, which made it quite difficult. So I never got to see a cadaver of what it was talking about, and Hannah probably would have been the same. So just another additional resource. Give it a go. It can be a bit overwhelming, but the photos are really great.
Yeah, no, that's a very good tip, especially for seeing photos of the cadavers, because the first time you see one, it's very different to the pretty diagrams they give us in our lectures.
It's all one color.
Yeah. We've got a question. Have you guys used online med ed? If so, is it useful for MD1s? I personally haven't used it. Have you used that, Charlotte?
I don't think so. I don't think I've heard of it.
Online med ed. Gabby, have you used that? We've got a third person here in the back.
I'm doing a live Google.
No, I haven't. I haven't used that one. Sorry, no thoughts.
Sorry about that.
But I mean, if they have a free trial, give it a go.
Yeah, literally, like just try as many different things as you can. With regards to anatomy, what did you feel was the best way to memorize the content? I feel like I'd be a bad person to answer this because I was an anatomy major in undergrad. So I was really lucky and had gotten all of the anatomy pracs and had been through the content before. I guess, Teach Me Anatomy is really, really good. Gabby's just popped that in the chat. It's a really good website that has good overviews of the amount of content that you need to know. And it also has good clinical little caveats about different topics that come up, they're good to read through as well, because that's probably like the more relevant anatomy and how they sort of integrate the anatomy into the questions that you'll be getting. I guess, again, Anki could be helpful for anatomy too. Like you could get diagrams that are labeled and like cross them out on Anki and use that, because I guess anatomy is another one that is more memorization. Do you have any tips for anatomy as well, Charlotte?
I didn't do anatomy major, but I did do anatomy in my undergrad, so I think as well I had a little bit of an advantage. However, I do know people that did use Anki, particularly there's like a hide feature, so you can put a screenshot of a diagram that's labeled and you can hide the labels and then you can get to remove them one by one, which can be helpful. I also found there's certain things that you just have to know, like the brachial plexus, like writing it out 100 times or whatever is a great way to learn it. Whereas I found, and maybe this is just how my mind works, is kind of if you look at things in like the bigger picture, as we've said many times, because it kind of anatomy makes sense. And I know that sounds really silly, and I don't know if it makes sense to any of you right now, but it's all about, and particularly in MD1, what they're focusing on is the relation of something to other things in the body. And in the locomotor block, it's a little bit different, which is all the muscles and the bones, which I just didn't really enjoy anyway. And I had to use Anki for that. But yeah, I think Anki is a good tip. Otherwise, if you can, like something I did with Teach Me Anatomy, which was really helpful, is sometimes the diagrams in the lecture didn't really show me exactly what I was supposed to. I didn't really understand what it was showing me. So I would look on Teach Me Anatomy and they sometimes like highlight a specific area in a different color than the rest. So it's obvious what you're supposed to be looking at. I don't know if that makes sense. And I would kind of add those diagrams next to my notes. So I could be like, this is this, but this is it from a different perspective. And I know a lot of people also bought, is it Complete Anatomy, the app?
Yeah. Is it 3D?
Yeah, which is, I think it's like $60. I never bought it. But once again, it's like a 3D anatomy app, and you can kind of add and remove things and see like the heart or lungs. You can swivel it around and see it from different ways. So
yeah, I did get that. I like split the cost with another student, and we just like use the same login. So you could do that. You could probably split it between a few people. I'm not sure how many devices it like lets you log in on, but that is really good. It's really helpful because you can, literally just like move muscles and like different organs like around and like see what all the different parts are called. So yeah, that is really useful. If you're struggling with anatomy, it could be worth it.
Because I think, I mean, personally, that's what's difficult about anatomy. It's not, because I think everyone has the ability to memorize things, but it's being able to visualize it and picture it. And really, I assume you guys will have anatomy practice with the cadavers in person. If you can like try and be up to date with your, particularly your anatomy lectures, try and be up to all of them. But if you're running behind the lectures and you're going to do one before the practice, make it the anatomy one and try and go into it with a little bit of an idea, because you'll get so much more out of it. Like you'll be able to ask questions to your demonstrator and you'll be able to see things and, you know, be pleasantly surprised because you'll know what it is and you'll be able to hold it, see it, point it out. And it's a really helpful tool. Do you know any good revision question banks we can use? PassMed. I personally didn't use any, I think. I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, I'm trying to think to first year.
And there's lots of resources that you can get from uni. They often will give out practice questions before a CAT. Halad often will always do questions before and after a revision session, which are also another just a great resource, more questions to add to the pile. And then I think have peer resources folder as well. I think I just used all of those in combination.
Yeah, I definitely used the arms revision questions.
Yeah. Because you can always, I think the problem with question banks is that it's difficult to set it or find one specifically at an MD1 level because it's not the same across undergrad med or postgrad med in the US, for example. But I think for specific things, like if I was struggling with dermatomes or something, I would just Google like dermatomes quiz and find one that seems beneficial. But I think what Gabby said in the chat is PassMed's a little bit off topic, but you could try.
And some of those resources probably would have questions that are good, but then there would also be a stack that are even beyond like the MD level. And it's, I guess it could make it like a bit disheartening to do them in MD1. Yeah. But they
and you can write your own as well. Like, I think it's something I tried to do, I think, in second semester was, because I always found, I know people always say, and you'll talk about it in PP, the best way to learn is to write your own questions and do them, or something like that, or do practice questions. And I wanted to write questions, but I always found that I was writing them and wanting to do them straight away, so I knew what the answer was because I'd just written them. So if you can try maybe after your blocks, it's actually, everything's coming back to me. It's actually something I did with a group of friends, is we made, it was just our friendship group. At the end of each block, we would allocate a lecture to each person, or 3 lectures to each person, how many it ended up being. We had a Google Doc, and we just asked everyone to write 5 multi-choice questions about each lecture and put an answer key at the bottom. And then we would kind of leave it, and then you go back to it when you're revising for CATs and exams. And that was a really great tool. As we mentioned before, work with friends, it's really, really helpful. So doing the questions earlier in the semester is great, because then you don't remember the answer because you haven't just written it.
yeah, definitely making your own resources is a very good one. Another little cheeky plug for Halad. So Charlotte has mentioned our revision session. So we do have revision sessions for each of the blocks. So our foundations one will be coming up soon, and they'll have questions embedded into the sessions as well, which is helpful. And we also produce some mock exams that you guys can use. And then we also have a Making of an Incredible MD podcast. Gabby, who's been back in the background today doing a bit of tech work, she is part of the production of that podcast. And season 4 is pretty relevant for you guys. It's Get Ready for Med School. So it sort of goes through the transition into med and some tips for med school. So if you need something to listen to on your commute, that could be something that helps you out. So yeah. Have another question. With Anki, did you make your own cars or use the shared decks floating around the community? Yeah, so another good one. So Anki, I personally in first year made my own questions, like when I did use Anki. But I do know of friends that have used, I think there's Anki decks, and you can download them. There's like YouTube tutorials. I tried to download them last year, but Anki is not for me. So it was very bad. And I didn't really enjoy doing them, but I do have friends that use those decks. And what they do is this might not make much sense if you don't understand how Anki works, but you can download all of these cards that someone else has already made. And then you can just have them in like a bank inside Anki, but you're not, when you come across a particular topic, so you might be in your foundations block, so you look up some like immunology process that you needed to learn, you can actually search the deck of cards that you have there and just use the ones that are relevant to the topics that are coming up. But in thinking about that, I feel like, although I didn't use it very much, but the Anki ones might be more of like an MD2, MD3 level potentially, but I mean, it's worth a try and see what they've got. Yeah,
I don't know where they were from, but same thing floating around. Someone had made anatomy decks, I think a couple of years ago maybe, which I think I tried to use, and this is what I guess the downfall of Anki is there is a benefit in making your own cards, because you're writing out a question, you're writing out an answer. However, that's really time consuming. So as I said, I would use Anki for things that you deem it suitable. For me, pharmacology, anatomy occasionally. There's no point doing it for every lecture, because the lectures aren't the main content anyway. And actually, this is an example, I'm kind of going off topic, but something I wanted to talk about earlier. I remember we had a lecture about ECGs in our cardio block. And I was like, it was like a 15-minute lecture. And I was like, yes, this is a nice short lecture for the week. Like, this is great. And it was just if anyone knows how ECGs work, it was kind of like, this is what a P wave is. I was like, this is great, this is fine. And then I didn't think it was too relevant, because it was a short lecture and it was one lecture. And traditionally you base content off like how much is in a lecture and how many lectures there are on it. And it's actually, and of course it is, it's a really high yield thing to actually know. And it took a lot more than that lecture to be able to read ECG. So things like that, clinically relevant things in lectures are really important. And there's some lectures that they probably won't assess at all because they just can't. So I guess repeating the same thing again, just trying to look at the big picture and what's actually relevant to med, is like as a whole, and patient.
I have a question just kind of leading off from that. So I'm not from directly a biomed background, so I'm understanding the basics of a lot of things, but some of the, I think I was looking at a lecture today and it was showing how heme turns into biliverdin or whatever that goes into bilirubin, and then all of the different enzymes involved. Like, obviously that's a very good understanding to have, but how often were the cats specifically testing like which enzyme is involved in this process, or was it really just understanding, like in this example, like how bilirubin is working in the body, and that background knowledge is just kind of good to know, if that makes sense?
I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, I feel like oh, you go, Charlotte.
I think, for example, for is that biochem? I'd say maybe physiology. I'm not sure. Well, for most of the time, all the small enzymes and those things aren't important. And I think they say this when it comes to we have a lot of lectures in the metabolism block, which go over this again. So I don't know what lecture you had in the first week that was explaining this, but you have it again in second semester. I think it's, in terms of what I remember of that topic, it wasn't so much, almost again, this is more of a metabolism topic. It wasn't so much memorizing each step, but it was, I remember we talked a lot about what happens if you're missing that enzyme, and what kind of problems would result, or how does missing that enzyme, or how does that process affect and result in a certain symptom or sign in a patient. And this is, that's a bit complex for like week 1 stuff, I'd say. So for now, don't know those enzymes. But yeah, it's the details aren't as critical as they may seem, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. It was all like so overwhelming, thinking, oh,
yeah,
I have to rote learn all of this stuff. But yeah, I think giving that example of how does this relate clinically is
I remember the metabolism lectures are really great, like that, the ones all about bilirubin and that, and how that relates particularly to jaundice, I guess, in this case. It all comes together in the moment. But yeah, as Gabby's just said in the chat, sometimes I do have those detail questions, but it won't be the bulk of the exam. And it is pass fail. I know we've talked a lot about assessments and things. And it's a weird kind of mindset to get into. Losing 1 or 2 marks on an exam is okay. Like, sometimes you just got to give, and you'll learn to change that mindset.
Yeah. Are there any other questions from anyone about anything we talked about, or even something we haven't talked about? We're happy to answer anything you've got. No worries, guys. Thanks, Ben.
Thanks so much, guys. That was really helpful.
We might handball just before you run away.
Yes, don't run away just yet, everyone. So I will just chat to you about how Halad to Health is going to help you this year. So my name is Gabby. You've probably seen me on Facebook. Apologies for the spam, but just trying to let you know about how our wonderful tutors, Hannah and Charlotte, and everyone else on our team, we've got a big team, and we'll be helping you out this year. So we do run block-based revision sessions, as Hannah and Charlotte were talking about. So each block, essentially, we will have 1 revision session, or if it's a chunky block like neuro, we'll have 2, because we understand we can't fit it all into the 1 session. And from there, those revision sessions will be really focused on the high yields concepts. So just like the question that was just asked about, detailed orientation, facts, how do they fit into the clinical picture? We'll show you in these sessions through case-based learning. So similar style to the CSLs, just to try and really reinforce these theoretical concepts in a clinical way to help you guys remember. So if you flick to the next slide, please, Han. We have some feedback from our wonderful students last year that really enjoyed these sessions. It was the first time we ran them last year and they ended up being a huge hit. So it was just a really great way, I think, for students to break up the monotony of learning in lectures and in classrooms, to come on Zoom, even though it's another Zoom. It is a different style and we really focus on the big picture stuff. We don't teach you anything we think you don't need to know. And we really try to teach it in a way that helps you remember as well. And the next slide will tell you about a special deal we have for you all. So we do have the 10 different sessions throughout the year. But if you're getting quick, you can buy a bundle now to get all 10 sessions, both a recorded version and your ticket to attend live, all for $70, which is already a discount of $5. However, if you are an Outlook Rural Health Club member, and if you're not, sign up now via that little QR code, you can get a further 30% off member discount. So you end up saving $25 throughout the entire year, and you get access to all of our resources. So that's all of our pre-class work, our live events and recordings of the events, our homework that we set for the events, as well as our any other extra resources that we send out. And then we have mock exams at the end of the year as well, which is really something that we didn't know whether it was going to work last year. We trialed it and students absolutely frothed it. We had so many sales and students were, thanking us because we didn't ever get really a resource like that. If we did, it was like a mini mock, which had like 10 or 15 questions, which isn't really representative of what the exam is at the end of the year. It is a big, big exam. So obviously if you get 10 and 15 questions, it's not going to test you on all the content that you need. So we give you a full size mock with MCQs and a few SACs as well, to help you guide your study in the final weeks of revision. So definitely sign up if you can. If you have any questions at all, feel free to message me on Facebook. You probably all have me on Facebook now, or via email. Here's the link to sign up, and here is my email address, gabby@haladtohealth.org. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. But now you're free to go if you'd like to go, if you don't have any questions. But thanks, Hannah and Charlotte, for conducting a brilliant session.
Thanks for coming, guys.
Bye.